All right, let's dive into Phase 4 of the CPM-AI lifecycle, model development. Now, you might hear this called the build phase, and it is, but for the exam, you've got to remember one critical thing. This is not a creative sandbox for your data scientists. Nope, it's all about disciplined, governed execution. See, your job as the PM isn't to build the best model possible, it's to build the right one. And we're going to break down exactly what that means. So here's our game plan to make sure you absolutely master this for exam day. First up, we'll define what this build phase really looks like through that special PMI lens. Then, we're going to walk through the must-know framework, the tasks, the inputs, the outputs. We'll nail down this whole idea of good enough, which is huge. Then, we'll dissect the most common exam traps, run through some practice scenarios, and finally, lock it all in with some super simple memory hooks.
Okay, so let's get into it. Phase 4, the build phase. At its heart, this is where we shift from all that planning into the real hands-on technical execution. But, and this is the key, this is what the exam is really going to test you on, this entire execution phase is completely governed by every single decision we made way back in Phase 1.
So let's start with a question that is, honestly, a classic exam trap. Is your job as the PM in this phase to push the team to build the absolute best, most accurate model possible? I mean, it's tempting to say yes, right? Of course, more accuracy has to be better, or does it?
Well, the correct PMI answer is a hard no. Absolutely not. Your job is not to chase technical perfection. Your one and only job here is to make sure the model that gets built is the exact one that was defined, constrained, and approved way back in Phase 1. So remember this mantra. Phase 4 executes, it doesn't invent. It's all about follow-through. Just think about the journey we've been on to get here. Back in Phase 1, we decided what to build. In Phase 2, we assessed the data to see if it was even possible. In Phase 3, we got all that data prepared. So now, here in Phase 4, our only job is to execute that plan. All the big strategic decisions, they're already locked in. Okay, let's get into the real mechanics now. For the exam, you absolutely have to know the specific tasks, inputs, and outputs for this phase. So let's map them out, nice and clear. You'll see the flow here is super logical. First, the team selects the modeling technique. And not just any cool new technique, but one that actually fits the constraints we already have. Then, and please burn this into your brain, you generate the model test design before any training happens. That is a massive point on the exam. Only after that's done do you actually train the model, and then finally you tune its little knobs and dials. That's called hyperparameter optimization, to make sure it hits the performance targets we set out from the start.
Now, what's so telling here are the inputs. This is where you really see that governance in action. Look at these. They aren't suggestions. They're non-negotiable constraints coming from the earlier phases. We've got the minimum acceptable performance values, the explainability requirements, all the legal and compliance rules. These are literally the guardrails for the entire build phase. The team has to stay within these lines.
And the outputs? They totally reflect this focus on governance. You see, the team doesn't just hand over a model and say, we're done. No way. They deliver a model candidate, along with its documented test design and its performance results. And, maybe most importantly for you as the PM, they have to deliver the evidence, the proof, that this model traces all the way back to and satisfies every single one of those Phase 1 requirements.
So this all leads us to the big gate at the end of Phase 4, proving technical acceptance. How do we know when the model is actually good enough to even be considered for the next phase, the formal evaluation in Phase 5? I'm going to say this again, because if you remember only one thing about Phase 4, let it be this. The goal is not to maximize accuracy. The goal is to build a model that satisfies the predefined performance and trustworthy requirements from Phase 1. Seriously, that should be your mantra for any exam question that touches on this phase. So what does good enough actually look like? Well, it's a simple two-part test. It's a pass-fail. First, the model has to meet or beat the minimum performance values we agreed on back in Phase 1. You know, something like recall must be at least 92%. And second, it absolutely cannot violate any of those trustworthy AI requirements, like being a black box when we explicitly said we need explainability. It has to pass both checks, no exceptions.
All right, now for my favorite part, the exam traps. This is where good intentions and common technical instincts can really lead you down the wrong path and cost you points on the exam. Let's make sure that doesn't happen.
Okay, trap number 1 is what I call the accuracy obsession. So, picture this. The team builds this super complex deep neural network. It's 2% more accurate than the simpler model, which sounds great, but it's a complete black box. The wrong instinct is to grab that extra 2% accuracy. The correct PMI move, you reject that model flat out. Why? Because it violates a non-negotiable requirement from phase 1. End of story.
Trap number 2, unconstrained AutoML. You know, it's so easy these days to just throw your data at an AutoML tool and let it pick the best model. But what if that best model is a black box and your project requires explainability? The wrong instinct is to just blindly trust what the tool spits out. The correct PMI move is to use the tool as a tool. You have to configure it, constrain it, and tell it to search only within the types of algorithms that already meet your phase 1 requirements.
And trap number 3, what I call objective testing. The team builds a model, they're really proud of it, and then they say, okay, let's design a test to show you how great this thing is. Whoa, that is a massive red flag for confirmation bias. The correct and only PMI move here is to insist that the model test design is finalized, documented, and signed off on before anyone even thinks about starting the model training.
Okay, enough theory. It's time to apply this stuff. Let's run through a couple of quick-fire scenarios, just like the ones you're going to see on the actual exam. Here's the first one. Your project has a non-negotiable phase 1 requirement for high explainability. The data science team comes to you all excited and proposes using an ensemble model that gets a 2% accuracy boost, but it's a total black box. As the PM, what is your next best action?
The answer? You have to reject the ensemble model. And the rationale is super clear. That model violates a hard requirement from phase 1. That little 2% accuracy gain, it's completely irrelevant because the model doesn't comply with the project's fundamental constraints.
Okay, scenario number 2. The team tells you they've finished training a model and it's ready for evaluation. So you say, great, let me see the test plan. And they kind of shuffle their feet and say, we haven't formally documented that yet. Which key deliverable is missing from phase 4?
That missing deliverable is, of course, the model test design. The rationale here is critical for the exam. This is a required deliverable from phase 4, and its whole purpose is to be generated before training starts. If you don't have it, any evaluation you do in phase 5 is basically subjective, biased, and from a PMI perspective, completely invalid.
Okay, let's wrap this all up. I want to give you some simple memory hooks, some little rules of thumb that you can take straight into the exam with you.
I want you to think in simple if-then rules, like this. If you see a conflict between accuracy and a trustworthy AI requirement, then the trustworthy requirement always wins. If a question mentions testing or evaluation, then your brain should immediately check that the test design was created before training. If you see an AutoML tool mentioned, then you know it has to be constrained by the phase 1 requirements. And finally, if the team is tuning a model, then remember the goal is just to meet the threshold, not to chase perfection.
So, I'll leave you with a final thought to chew on. Does a model that passes all these technical checks in phase 4 actually guarantee a successful project? Well, no, not yet. That's what we have to prove in phase 5 and beyond. But understanding the rules of phase 4 does guarantee you'll be on the right track. So remember those 3 big takeaways. 1. Phase 4 is for execution, not invention. Stick to the phase 1 plan. 2. The goal is good enough, not perfection. Meet your thresholds. And 3. The model test design comes before training. Always. Get those down and you'll be in great shape for the exam.